So we're going to continue the series today, The Gods at War, and we're going to pick it up where we left off last week. We're going to this week do God of Love. And I'll have to be honest with you, this is a sermon that I never pictured myself ever preaching in church, because as I looked at the curriculum and I was kind of planning the sermon, I realized we're going to say that God of love, in other words, the God with a small g, can take over your life from the Lord God. And I'm thinking, how does that work exactly? Because the Bible tells us that God is love. And Jesus, when he was talking to his disciples, says, here's how they'll know you're my disciples, that you love one another. So we're commanded to love. God is love. And so I was looking at this sermon, I'm thinking, so basically the sermon has to say it's okay to love. In fact, you're supposed to love, but just not too much. I'm thinking, man, that's a nuanced sermon I don't know that I can nail. I'm more of a blunt instrument sort of a pastor. And I was kind of thinking, really, how do you even guide people in that? I hate theoretical, intellectual sermons that don't meet us where the rubber meets the road. So I always like to try to make it something we can take away and use. And how can I tell you how much is too much? How do I do that? And I just struggled with this for a long time, and sometime this week I told Victoria, I said, I'm going to go down to Spirit Chapel, I'm going to turn on the cross, I'm going to turn on some music, I'm going to listen and sing some songs, and then I'm going to pray, because I'm going to have to hope God breaks through, because right now I've got nothing. A very uncomfortable feeling for me so late in the week. I just didn't really know how I was going to preach this sermon. And so I turned on the cross and turned on the music, and if you're ever driving by the thing late at night and you see the lights on, that's probably what's going on. And about half hour in, God broke through my stubborn little head and said, you're thinking about this all wrong. You keep trying to think about it as a quantity problem. Don't love too much. It's not. It's a sequence problem. Now here's what I mean by that. That God's telling me that in a sequence of things, there is a way you have to love. And that has to start with me. He says, isn't that you can't love other things and you have to worry about how much you love them. You have to love me first, he says. And then he took me back to the beginning, literally the beginning, Genesis. I end up there a lot because, whenever you get lost, you go back to the beginning. I'm in Genesis a lot, whatever that tells you. But as I kind of looked at the pattern of love that's revealed to us in the book of Genesis at the beginning of creation, I realized there's a sequence here that goes kind of beyond even this sermon, but there's a sequence God gives us for love. In the beginning, of course, we know that God created the heavens and the earth. Now, this is a little sidelight, kind of a mini sermon, if you will, because I discovered something when I was doing the study of this, that the word for God used here is actually interesting because it is Elohim, which is the Jewish word here, and it actually is plural God. So this is the plural persons God. And that might seem odd to you, but here's the thing. We know the scriptures tell us that God was present. All parts of the Trinity were present at creation because God the Father was there. Genesis tells us God created. But also the Spirit of God was hovering above the water. So the Holy Spirit's there. And if you triangulate from John, the Gospel of John, John tells us that in the beginning the Word was there, and the Word is Jesus. So we have Scripture reference for all three of these persons. They were all there. And since God is love, love was there. And so when God created the heavens and the earth, what he was really doing was he was creating a place to put his creation to share the love that they had. The Holy Spirit, Jesus, and the Father. They had this great communion. They had this great love. And they said, let's make man in our image so that we can share this. And that's what they did. Now, they made in the image, which means, they have feelings because God has feelings. They have senses because God has senses, just in a complete image of God. But remember, God is love, which means that when God created us in his image, he stamped into our DNA love. In other words, you have built into your DNA the need and desire to love and be loved. We all do. In fact, if you meet a human being that doesn't have that built into them, we call them a psychopath. It's a broken human being. If you're a normal functioning human being, you have a desire to love and be loved. It's just wired into you. And we do all kind of stupid things with this. We'll love anything, it seems. We will love pets. We will love teams. Several years ago, we loved pet rocks. I don't know if you remember that. Or some people love pet rocks. We will love anything because it's built into us. It's just wired into us. So God said, we're going to make man, so we're going to share this. And they did. But when God looked at that, he says, that's not quite right. Because we have each other, the Holy Spirit, the Father, and the Son. We have this as well as the vertical love, with our creation. He doesn't. He only has us. We need to make something of his own kind that he can love. And so they literally split man. They take a rib out and they make woman, and they make him a helper comparable to him. So this allows Adam and his wife Eve to love each other horizontally as well as love vertically to God. And at this point, of course, everything was right with the world. But if you keep following the Genesis account, Adam and Eve have Cain and Abel, their children, and the love gets passed down to the next generation. So the love continues at that point. And then, of course, the mankind multiplies and tribes come out, and they kind of form together in that. But we start seeing this sequence or this pattern coming out of the Genesis stories that goes like this. First God, then man and wife, then family, and then community. And so this is the sequence that love entered the world. And I believe this is the sequence God intends as far as priority goes. But we're not going to talk about all those today. I would tell you, though, that if you get these out of order, you're going to be in problems, because this is the sequence God intended. And I believe that's why he put it the way he did in Genesis. But today we're only going to talk about the first one, God, and why God has to come first. Well, God has to come first because he invented love. God is love, but you can say he invented it. In other words, he is the originator of love. And if you want to know what love looks like, you have to go to the original. And if you take that out of your life, then what you're doing is you're just kind of guessing, or you're working off of the image of a copy. And if you've ever taken a Xerox piece of paper and then copied it, and then copied that Xerox and copied that Xerox, over time it starts to degrade. And this is what happens to our world when we start to do that, and we start to slowly degrade things over time. I don't know if you've ever played this game. Years ago, there was a game called Telegraph or Telephone. It was a party game where you would start and you would kind of start speaking something into somebody's ear, and then they'd go down the line. I thought I'd explain it all to you, and I thought it'll be just easier to show. This is a movie clip that shows you this kind of in action.
Get this to Johnny on the grapevine. Vermin's going to kill Johnny's brother at the Savoy Theater tomorrow night. Got it?
Got it. Vermin's going to kill Johnny's brother at the Savoy Theater. Pass it on.
Vermin's gonna kill Johnny's brother at the Savoy Theater tonight. Pass it on.
Vermin's gonna kill Johnny's mother at the Savoy Theater tonight. Pass it on.
Vermin's mother's gonna kill Johnny at another Savoy Theater. Pass it on.
Vermin's gonna kill my mother at the Savoy tonight. Pass it on.
Urgent message through the grapevine, Johnny.
Yeah? What is it?
Johnny and the mothers are playing something at the Savoy in Vermont tonight.
Vermin's gonna kill my brother at the Savoy Theater tonight.
I didn't say that.
No, but I know this grapevine.
So that's kind of a game of telegraph, but you can see what happens is you take the original message and slowly start repeating it. It loses something in the translation. By now, generations and generations of humans have come and gone on this planet, and if you're just going to look around each other to try to figure out what love looks like, you're going to miss out. You need to go back to the original. And if you think about it, if you're not going to go to God, where do you go? Where do you go to get your image of love? Well, I don't know. How about love songs? That's kind of a popular place. And this might seem silly, but I'm telling you, I know people, I have met people who tell me, oh, this song is just like my love life. I've met a lot of those people. And think about that for a second. We're going to let our image of love come from a love song. Well, I did this little search. I did a quick search of the top 40 hits, and I just took random names off of that list. And I thought, I wonder what these experts on love who are writing all the songs are like in real life. And you can do this yourself. Just go there and then Google, their name plus love or love affair, and it's remarkable what you find out in a hurry. So just again, random sampling. On the top of the list is Pitbull, a lovely guy, but he has a baby mama, which means that he has a kid to a woman he has no intention of marrying. And recently she sued him because he wasn't paying her enough money, and they ended up settling out of court. But probably, if you think about that, not the best advice that we would be taking for how to love. If you move down that list, we also have this guy. He shows up again. Eminem has a new hit out. Again, probably not the man you want to listen to when it comes to love advice. In fact, even he tells tells you this. He says, I've had a lot of success, I've had a lot of material things, but I've never conquered love. And that whole word there, conquered love, may be why he's having his problems. But I've never had that always successful relationship. Again, probably not the guy you want to turn to for love advice, especially if you've read some of the other things he's had to say. We have Rihanna. She's on the list. And you may know this story, but not too long ago, her husband, Chris Brown, was charged with felony assault and put in jail because of how badly he was beating her. And she was on the Oprah show saying, I still love him. Not who I want my daughter going to for love advice, I got to tell you. We have Katy Perry. Katy Perry was married to Russell Brand, and I don't know if you know much about him, but he ended up divorcing her, rumor has it, because of substance abuse that was too much for him. And when he's saying it's too much, you've really got a problem. And she says, well, after that happened, she contemplated committing suicide. Maybe not the best place to go. And then we have this one, Jay-Z and Beyonce, who recently performed at the Grammys, and it turns out there's a line in the song that's this kind of coded, veiled reference to spousal abuse. It comes from when Tina Turner and Ike, who was a very famous spousal abuse case for years, they pulled a line out of that life and they used it, and they're up there singing about their love affair and their marriage, which includes apparently spousal abuse. When they were asked about it, they kind of backed off. They wouldn't talk about it. But again, probably not anybody that you would run to say, hey, give me some advice on love. And the reason I say this is because if someone came to you and said, look, give me all your money, I'm going to invest it for you, and I'm going to make you rich. One of the very first questions you'd ask yourself is, well, how much money do you have? You wouldn't want some bum on the street investing your money for you. And so I'm just saying, if we're going to go to these people and say, oh, you rate these great love songs, you must have the answers, take a look at their lives. Some of the most messed up people you'd ever meet. Now, I know it's easy for me to sit up here and complain about modern music, and I know that what that sounds like. It kind of makes me feel and sound old. I didn't want to do that. So I thought in fairness, I was going to tell you a story from my life, because when I was growing up in high school, this was my guy. His name's Harry Chapin. You've probably never heard of him. If you've heard of one of his songs, maybe Cats in the Cradle, Taxi, something like that, but he didn't have many hits. But I loved this guy. I thought he was just the greatest lyricist of our time. And we used to go, a bunch of my friends, we were all Chapin fans, and we would go to his concerts. And this picture that you see right there, I took with my camera. I literally walked up on stage and was taking pictures during the concert. Nobody stopped me. Probably should have been arrested, but I was there taking pictures because I'd been to enough Chapin concerts to know how laid back it was. And so this lyric is one of my favorite songs of his. It was written for his wife. It's a song called A Story of a Life. And the end of it goes, after he goes through everything that he thought was going to make up his life, he kind of comes to the end and he looks at it this way. He says, well, sometimes words can serve me well, and sometimes they can go to hell for all the good that they do. And for every dream that took me high, there's been a dream that's passed me by. I know it's so true, but I can see it clear out to the end, and I'll whisper to her now again, because she shared my life, and more than all the ghosts of glory, she makes up the story of my life. It's just this really beautiful love song. So this was done in Greensburg, and I kind of had this thing set up because, again, we had been to so many of the concerts that we knew how things went, and there was always one song he did called Flowers in Red. And right after it, I had my girlfriend walk on stage and hand him a bouquet of red roses. It was a big moment. Everybody applauded. Probably thought that we had arranged it with the theater, but we didn't. We just knew there was no security, so we just went and did it. And it was a big thing, and he thanked her and all that. After the concert, one thing Harry Chapin did, he was very much involved in world hunger. And so when he did these benefit concerts, he would call them, all the proceeds from all the paraphernalia he'd sell, the magazines, books, and albums, and because they had albums back then, and T-shirts, he would give all the proceeds to world hunger. And as long as people were buying them, he would sit there and sign it for you. And so he would sit there for hours after concert doing this. And this is, like I said, I just thought this was a great guy. And so we were all there, of course, and we were picking out the things we wanted to get autographed. And a couple of my friends and I were kind of looking over the table. My girlfriend picked up the T-shirt that she wanted, so she went ahead of us to get an autograph. And when she got there, of course, he recognized her as the girl who brought him the flowers, and he tried to pick her up. and take her back to his hotel room. And when I found out about that, it was just like a knife went through me. I thought, man, here is this beautiful love song you wrote for your wife. And before the words are done echoing off the walls, you're trying to pick up some, and maybe you didn't know this, but she was a minor, to go back to your hotel room. And what kind of a guy are you? But this was like my first realization that these singers and these popular people that we know and they seem to have it all together, believe me, they're some of the most messed up people you'd ever want to meet. So if you turn away from music and you turn love songs, and well, that's not where we're going to get our image of love. Where are we going to turn to next? And so the next thought is, well, how about Hollywood? That's a good idea. Some of you know where I'm going here, because if there's anything more depraved than the music industry, it's the movie industry. But they seem to have it together. We all have movies that we love that have shown love affairs or just love triangles or whatever you want to call them, and that you just wish you had. How many times that you hear somebody say, or maybe you've said, man, I wish I had someone like that in that movie that's just perfect for you. And so if you did this and you went to look and you did a kind of a study of all the movies, all the love stories, and you ranked the top 10, which happens every Valentine's Day. There were a bunch of lists you probably saw came out. It seems like in the past couple decades, there's a couple movies that always end up on top. And this movie always makes a list. It's frequently number one in a lot of people's eyes. It's the number one scene of all love movies kind of made in the last decade or two. But again, you'll recognize this scene when it comes by.
You complete me. And I just had...
Shut up. Just shut up. You had me at hello.
So this is one of those movies that everybody knows, and this scene everybody knows. And listen, I love movies. I'm not here to lay out your favorite movie. And if you love this movie, that's great. But I just have to say, as a pastor, this is really dumb. And I'll tell you why. And again, not trying to ruin anybody's movie, but the reason why I just know that whole "you complete me" thing is dumb and doesn't work is because I've kind of tried to live that. And here comes my least favorite part of this sermon. In fact, when I was preparing the sermon, I got to this part, and I felt God was leading me to tell you what I'm about to tell you. I said, "Oh, not that, Lord. Let's talk about something else." But he told me, "Nope, it's time for you to be honest and kind of lay it all out there." So anyway, what I'm talking about here, and some of you know that because you know me, and you've known me for a long time, but many of you don't. So I'm just going to tell you that your pastor has been divorced and married not once, but twice. And let me tell you something, when you lived where I lived at the time, which was the buckle of the Bible Belt in Texas, that just puts you in a whole new category of sinner as far as the people there, the good God-fearing folk of Texas were concerned. Boy, you've been married and divorced twice. There is something kind of wrong with you. The first one, they kind of give you a mulligan. 50% of all marriages end in divorce. Unhappily, that's exactly the same statistic in the church and out of the church, which probably shouldn't be. But so kind of, one, okay, 50%, you flip a coin, give you the mulligan, you can try again. But boy, when you've gone through that second marriage, now people start looking at you funny. And I knew that. I mean, I could feel it, and believe me, I felt the same way because I was shocked when my second marriage ended. I just thought, that would never happen again, and there it was. And so it was very difficult for me. I was involved in some churches insofar as I was going to some churches at the time, and I believed in God through all of this. I was a Christian through both my marriages. My first wife I met in a Bible study. I just thought that my life was going to turn out differently than all this, and I was shocked when it didn't. And suddenly I kind of felt like, I was wearing a scarlet A, or actually a scarlet D, would be a better term. And I could feel it. And maybe the people weren't really judging me the way I thought they were, but it felt like they were. To the point where I realized at this point, after my, when the reality of the second divorce sunk in, I thought, I'm done. As far as being a minister of any kind in a church, I'm done. I mean, I didn't think I'd be a preacher by that point in my life, but I thought I'd be involved somehow. I thought I would teach a Bible study or a home group or something, But in the good state of Texas, when you've been divorced twice, it's kind of like, yeah, we don't even want you parking our cars. You can come, you can sit, you can sing, but we're not going to put you anywhere near the front of leadership positions. So I was done, and I recognized that, and I accepted that, and that was just kind of going to be it. So when Victoria and I got married, I knew this was my last chance at a marriage. I mean, that was it. Because after 3 marriages, it's like, you kind of say, it's probably me. I've had 3 wives tell me this now, it's probably me. So I knew this one had to be my last marriage. This was it. And given that, you would have thought that I would have done some study. And I would have thought, okay, make a list of everything you did wrong in your previous 2 marriages. There's a lot of material there. And, let's try to make sure that you don't repeat those. And listen, I would love to sit up here and tell you that my first 2 marriages ended because my wives were just wackos and there was nothing I could do. It was all them. I'd love to tell you that, but God told me I had to be honest today. And the reality is, to be honest, if I look at the corpse of my previous marriage, my fingerprints are all over it. And I contributed, and that's the kind of thing you would have thought that I would have sat down and done before I married Victoria. But I didn't, because I was still operating under this whole "you complete me" mindset. See, that the thing about this "you complete me" thing that's so dangerous is it basically puts all the onus of a happy marriage on the other person. See, I just hadn't found the person to complete me in my previous 2 marriages. All I needed was the right person, and everything would be fine. Everything I had done was great. It's just that the person was wrong. This is the problem with the "you complete me" thing. And for one thing, that's a horrible burden to put on Victoria as we come together. Guess what? I'm a mess, but you're going to complete me, and everything's going to be fine now. But it also is doomed to fail because people will let you down. I don't know if you knew that, and some of you are in like young relationships and they won't. Yes, they will. People will let you down, and that's the challenge you run into when you're going into this with the mindset, I just need to find the right person, and then wow, it's just happily ever after for us. It doesn't work that way. But anyway, so Victoria and I got married, and I was basically very quickly kind of hitting the same patterns and doing all the same things that I'd done in my first 2 marriages. Why I thought I'd be different this time, I don't know. But somehow I did. And we kind of hit this snag somewhere around our 3rd year of marriage, and we sort of reevaluated our marriage. Now, I want to be clear about this. It's not like, either of us were off cheating, and neither of us had an alcohol problem or an abuse problem. It was just that our marriage really wasn't what either one of us had expected or wanted going in. And there comes a point when you realize that, and you fight it for a little while, but after a while you finally come to this idea of, I'm just going to compromise. That isn't what I wanted, but it's not bad. I like her. It isn't the hot romance that was going to take me into the end of my life, but it's okay. I'm just going to have to redefine some things and reset some expectations, and she was doing that on her end. And after a while, after a few years together, you kind of get to the point where you know what you can talk about, can't talk about without it turning into a fight. And so if you're feeling like a fight, you know which buttons to push. You sure know those. But you also know how to stay away from those buttons if you just don't feel like fighting right now. And so we kind of hit this equilibrium, if you will. And you'll hear people tell you things like, marriage is all about compromise. And that's true to a point if what they're saying is that you don't always get what you want in the marriage, but it shouldn't be true if it's compromising the ideal. And so I'm going to compromise the fact that I don't really feel loved like I wanted to, and I don't really love like I wanted to, and that's okay. That should be a compromise you never make. But it was a compromise that we did make. And after a few years, we kind of hit this equilibrium where we were okay together. We were friendly. And, we still, had a date on Valentine's Day. That's always good. But we were never really where we wanted to be and where we thought we were at the beginning. And even though you kind of got okay with this, there was a part of me that was never okay with this. Because in my heart of hearts, I was always this guy.
Hear this now.
I will always come for you.
But how can you be sure?
This is true love. Think this happens every day?
Yeah, this is true love. It doesn't happen every day. I wanted to be that guy. I wanted to be the guy with the true love. And I wasn't. And so over a period of time, we hit this equilibrium, and you were kind of living with it, but yet every now and then it would kind of eat you up a little bit. Now, I wish I could tell you that I did something to make all this change. But I didn't, because the first step actually was made by God. And I don't know why. I don't know why he made it when he made it. I don't know why then, not before. I don't know. I can't answer that because I can't remember specifically. But I do know what he did. What he did was literally move me. And he took me out of Texas and he brought me back here to Pennsylvania. And that was a really good move for me in a lot of ways, especially spiritually, because I had been relegated to the sidelines and I had become okay with that. And I was just going to be some guy going to church like most of the people going to church. Even though, again, in my heart of hearts, I knew God had always called me for more than that. But I had accepted it because I really didn't see there's any other thing I could do. But when we moved from Texas back to Pennsylvania, especially in this area, I made a couple discoveries. And one of them was that my name meant something to a lot of people in the area because my father had spent 30 years here as a minister. So I kind of had this positive feeling to my name. A Q rating is what they would call it in Hollywood. So that was good. But the other thing that was interesting was the churches around here weren't the mega churches that I was used to going to in Texas. And they just needed people who were willing to do the work. They weren't nearly as discriminating about who did the work. In Texas, they had so many people lined up. They could be really choosy, but here it was almost like, well, we just need somebody. Can you help us? And so we got involved in a church, and pretty much right away, somebody came up and said, I heard you singing in church. Do you want to sing sometime in the choir? I said, no, I really don't. And the reason I said no was because I'm thinking, whoa, as soon as we get there, they're going to start asking some embarrassing questions, and I don't want to go there. I'm enjoying the fact that no one knows that I've been divorced twice. There's an old George Strait song, "All My Exes Live in Texas." That was literally my life. And okay, if I don't talk about it, no one has to know about it, and we'll just be here, and it'll be better that way. But the second time, the person who actually ran the music came up to me and personally asked me if I would sing sometime in church, and I said no again. And as soon as I said it, and she said, okay, and she walked away, I just felt horrible about that. And I thought, man, I should have said yes. And so I said, a little prayer there, and I said, God, if they ever ask me again, I'll say yes. But I think that was the right thing to do this time. I said no. So next week, of course, she comes back and asks me again. So I say yes. And so I come and I sing and did a solo in church for, I think, the offering or something. And it felt good. I mean, it'd been a long while since I'd sung in church, I think 30 years at the time. And I used to do it a lot. I used to speak in churches and all that, but not after my marriage and divorce. That was all over. So it felt good to be back doing something. And afterwards, my wife said something to me that really surprised me. She said, and this is kind of just out of the blue, she says, I was watching you up there singing, and I have to tell you that I probably loved you more just then while you were singing than I've loved you in years. Oh, wow, okay, that's all right. And I felt even better about this singing thing. And then they asked me to sing again, and I said yes, and I was getting some positive feedback. And I'd speak a little bit before I sang, which is kind of the Chapin model, and people seemed to like that too. And so it was feeling good. Like, what? Maybe I can have a small little part in a small church and have a ministry, and that's fine. I didn't ask for anything more than that. I was okay with that. And then I said to God this prayer, which was a real dangerous prayer, which I highly recommend if you want to live a dangerous life, is I said, God, anything they ask, I'll say yes to. Because this worked out so well. I'm feeling good about this. And boy, don't you know, they started asking me to do all kinds of things. Before I knew it, I was, on member session, and I was leading a Bible study in my house, a home group, and even when the pastor went on sabbatical, I pinch hit and preached a few times, and things were kind of starting to change in my life. Now, I was also, as part of my day job, if you will, I was traveling a lot. In fact, I went to Virginia quite a lot, almost once or twice a month at least. And these long trips, I started listening to different things on radio, because I'm a very bored driver. Music doesn't do it for me. So I listened to podcasts and books on cassette, and I was traveling back and forth. And the very same time this was happening, Stas, Victoria's son, went to Afghanistan. So here's Victoria now home all alone, and she's kind of lonely. And I feel bad for her, because even though our marriage wasn't this red-hot love affair that we thought we were going to have, she was still a friend of mine, and I knew how lonely she was. And so I remember I just asked her one time, hey, why don't you come with me? Making all these trips, why don't you come with me? And even as I said that, there's some part in the back of my mind, are you nuts? What are you doing? You're going to be in the car with her for 6.5 hours. What are you guys going to talk about? Because you can avoid subjects for a couple hours at night, but man, 6.5 hours down, 6.5 hours back, you're going to run into some subjects that are going to cause problems. And but I really honestly just felt horrible that she was so lonely. And she surprised me, because she doesn't like taking long trips in a car. She said, okay. And so she started traveling with me. Well, when I travel, I love to listen to audiobooks. Love that. She hates it. So I knew right away we're going to have to do something about that. We're going to have to come up with something. And so I downloaded a lot of sermons from our pastor that we had in Texas. Now, these are mostly sermons we'd heard before, but it had been several years, and I was kind of having this little renewal, a spiritual renewal, so I was interested in these things again. And so I asked her, well, what about if we listen to this? And she said, fine, put it on. So we started listening to them back and forth. And then we would talk about them. It was really kind of a neat time, because we were starting to reconnect at a different level, really, than we ever had. Again, remember, we were both Christians when we got married. It's not like one of us suddenly had a conversion. It's just that we were on the sidelines, both of us, for so long. Well, we're coming back. I'll never forget this. We were coming back from one of the trips, and I was going through my playlist on my phone, and the pastor we were listening to had just started a 6-part series on tithing. And I'm like, oh man, I do not want to listen to this series. And I'd heard it before, in fact, and I'm looking and looking and looking, and that's it. Every one I had was him preaching about a different part of tithing. I said, Victoria, you're not going to believe this, but Robert's preaching about nothing but tithing. That's all I have. And she said, well, put it on. Let's listen to it. We've heard it before. Let's just listen to it. So I put it on, and we're working through the series, and something kind of starts changing in me. And I come to this verse that he used in his teaching, and it kind of went right through me when Jesus says, you can't serve two masters. You're going to love one and hate the other. He says, you cannot serve the Lord God and mammon. Now, a lot of people think he says God money, but he doesn't. He says God and mammon. And mammon was literally a deity that was worshipped at the time. It was a deity of the world. And greed was part of it, but it was more than that. But he's really saying you can't worship God and the God of this world, which is greed. And so then he goes further in Matthew, and he says this, and this one really hit me. He says, where your treasure is, your heart is also. And I remember thinking, that's not the way I remember that verse. I always thought it was the other way, where your heart is, your treasure is, like your treasure follows your heart. But that's not what Jesus said. He said that where your treasure is, your heart follows. And I really became convicted by that, because I've been trying to figure out a way where I could put God back in charge of my heart. And it was almost like Jesus was telling me, this is how you do it. But I didn't want to do that. I mean, of all the things, I did not want to do that. And I remember driving along and kind of fighting this fight internally. Like, I don't want to do this, do I? But I have to. And so just this back and forth. And so finally I said, okay, God, here's the deal. I'm going to tell Victoria that I think we should start tithing. And she's going to say no. And the reason she's going to say no is Victoria's the CFO of our family, and she pays all the bills. So she always knows how much money we have, which is never enough. And so I knew there was no way she was going to go for this, because I'm basically saying, hey, we're going to cut my salary by 10%. Yeah, that'd be a good idea. So I said, I'll ask. Because all of a sudden she's the boss, right? If I want to buy something, she isn't, but all of a sudden she's the boss. I'll ask her, but if she says no, it's no. Just so you know, God, nothing I can do. And so I said to Victoria as we're driving, I said, I'm thinking maybe we should start tithing again. And she said, so do I. I thought, oh, there it goes. My fail-safe plan shot. So that becomes our move. That was our move. So God started it with his move, literally moving us and kind of reawakening a spirit in me that I had buried. Our response to that was we started tithing. And then the next step is a miracle happened. This cartoon is a famous cartoon. If you're a nerd, you've seen this before. This guy showing his colleague his work, and the first is all these mathematical equations. The next one says, and then a miracle happens, and he goes on to step 3, and the guy watching it says, we might want to flesh out step 2 here a little bit. And I wish I could flesh out step 3 in my case here when I say a miracle happened, but I really can't. I cannot really explain to you how God did what he did next. But I can tell you it happened fast, like within a week or 2 of us starting to tithe. It was almost like God said, finally, now watch what I do. Well, what happened in specifics, just so you know, we ran out of sermons and we were looking for something else to watch or listen to. And so I found this book online that was a big controversy called Real Marriage. It's written by Mark and Grace Driscoll. And Mark Driscoll is a controversial pastor, I guess, a polarizing pastor. You either love him or you hate him kind of a guy. And he is an influential pastor. He started a church in Seattle when he was right out of college. He picked Seattle because it was the least church city in the country. And over time, his church has grown into a mega church of thousands and thousands of people. And he's become a very influential voice of the modern pastor and the modern Reformationist movement. But he wrote this book called Real Marriage. Now, he pastors a church made up mostly of 20-somethings and some 30-somethings. And they were going to do this book and then a sermon series on marriage, and so they asked their congregation, hey, send us in some questions and we'll answer them. Well, don't you know, you ask a bunch of 20-somethings the most important questions they have about marriage, it's all about sex. So they got all these sex questions coming into them. And I admire this about Mark Driscoll. He took it on. And he and Grace decided, you know what, this is what they want to know. No codes, no fancy talk, we're going to go right into it. And so chapter 10 of this book is entitled, Is It Okay If We? And they answer them. I mean, flat out, they answer the questions. And again, you can agree or disagree with his answer, but you have to admire his courage for taking that on. And I thought, well, this should be an interesting conversation starter. Now, Victoria and I have been married by this time by 7 years. It's not like we were going to be embarrassed by sex talk. But I thought, well, that's going to be interesting when we get to chapter 10. What I didn't expect was chapter 1. Because in chapter 1, Mark and Grace Driscoll are very open about their marriage. And it turned out that while he was starting this church that went supernova and became one of the biggest mega churches in America, at one time was the fastest growing church in America, for this 11-year period that this church was seeing this phenomenal growth, he and Grace lived in a loveless marriage. And they described how they felt about each other in this marriage, and Victoria and I were looking at each other like, I can't believe this. He was a pastor. He was a renowned pastor. He was going around the world and preaching on things, including marriage. And, basically back at home, his marriage was a sham. And he was very open about that. And again, I admire his courage. And they talked about that, and we kind of looked over each other and thought, we've only been married for 7 years, and we're not that bad off. And so suddenly we started looking at, hey, you know what? Our marriage isn't done. It isn't time to throw in the towel. Maybe we can do this. I remember looking over at one point, and Victoria's just sitting there crying. Like, I can't believe this. It's like us. And we could do this if they could do it. Because, of course, after chapter 1 and chapter 2, the story turns around because God stepped in. And so suddenly we're like, well, God could step into our marriage. And so things sort of changed there. And what happened was, and boy, don't miss this, what happened was the moment we started tithing, we put God first in our life. And as soon as we got first, then he said, okay, now I can run things. See, you have to understand that you will never get love right until you put the one who invented it in charge. But what I mean by that is it's not enough just to believe in God. Like, we believe in God, sure, I believe he's there, and every now and then I'll consult his Bible. If I'm really hurting, I'll hear a good sermon or whatever. It's not enough. You can't just believe in God to have him fix your marriage or your life. You have to put him in charge, because it's only when he gets in charge that he starts making changes, because the reality is I was loving Victoria all wrong. And as long as I was only getting ideas from him, yeah, I got this, God, just give me a few good ideas, for Valentine's Day to woo her or whatever, that's not going to do any good. It isn't until God steps in and says, Mark, whoa, what are you doing? And starts guiding what I'm doing that things change. Because it changes my heart, it changes her heart, and just starts breaking down. In other words, the way Jesus put it was, seek first the kingdom of God, and we'll add the other things for you. But you have to put God in charge first. And that's where we're kind of bringing this back to a close here. It's not a quantity thing. It's not how much you love somebody. It's who do you love first. You have to love God first. Because when God is in charge, he makes miracles happen. When God is in charge, he heals broken hearts. When God is in charge, he renews the mind. He renews the marriage. When God is in charge, he makes everything new. When he's just somebody you know, it doesn't work. You have to put God in charge. He has to be there first. And I talked about this a couple weeks ago. When you start talking about putting God in charge, like, well, if I love God first, does that mean that Victoria, my marriage, is going to be sacrificed on the altar of God? And God told me, listen, I love Victoria more than you do. You think I'm going to do something to hurt her? You can trust God, is the point. And he says, if you put me first, I'm going to teach you how to love Victoria better. It's not me or her. It's me then her. And you have to get that right. So it brings it back full circle to kind of what we opened up the series with here. When Joshua stood before the Israelites and said, choose this day. What God are you going to serve? Are you going to serve the God across the river that got your forefathers in trouble? Are you going to serve the gods of the world that are around you? The Pitbulls, the Beyoncés, and the Tom Cruises, the gods of the world? Are you going to serve the Lord God? And then he ended by saying, you can do what you want. But as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. Would you all pray with me right now?